My name's Hank Robb, and I'm here with my friend Bill. Our aim on this evening is to lay out the psychological territory, the general context from which any psychological issue can be addressed. Anything that's addressed is addressed in some sort of context. And the point of our conversation tonight is to demonstrate the lay of the land, where are the mountains, where are the valleys in the psychological world. So, the first place to start is with thoughts and images and bodily sensations. Those are kind of some basic psychological building blocks. And by thoughts, I mean those kind of radio programs inside your head, blah, blah, blah. And by images, I mean anything with a picture. So the difference between thoughts and images is roughly the difference between the radio and the television set. With the radio, there's never any pictures. And with the television, there's always pictures. You can push the mute button and you got silent pictures. You can push the pause button, you get still pictures, but there's always a picture. Now, the last big broad category is bodily sensations, or we can just call them sensations for short. Things like your heart is beating more rapidly or more slowly, your skin is feeling cooler or warmer, your stomach feels more tense or more relaxed. The lights of the stage may make us feel warmer. The fact that we're on a video recording may make our heart beat a little more rapidly. About our thoughts and images and bodily sensations, we do have some control. So, for example, if I ask you to make yourself have this thought, I am sitting in a chair, my guess is you can make yourself do that. Yeah? And if I ask you to make an image either of the vehicle you came here in or your kitchen at home, my guess is you can probably do that too.
Right.
Now, controlling bodily sensations is the most difficult. Most people can't do it very well, but some people have more talent than others. The zipper on your jacket. If you can, see if you can bring into your fingertips the sensations that would go with actually touching it, feeling that hole in the center, the metal feel, grabbing it, and then being able to pull it down, hearing the zipper sound. Are you able to bring those sensations into your fingertips?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I wouldn't be at all surprised if you said no, because most people can't control their bodily sensations worth a darn. But you're more talented than most, so we'll say that you can. The big thing about thoughts and images and sensations is, while we do have some control of them, most of the time they just show up. We don't ask them to come, they just arrive, unbidden, you might say. So, if I say to you, Jack and Jill went up the
hill.
Yes. Now, you could have remained quiet and said nothing, but you would have had a heck of a time not hearing the word hill in your head.
Right.
Now, hill's okay, but it's pretty ordinary, so I like this one. Little Miss Muffet sat on a
Tuffet?
Yes, you're a little uncertain, but Tuffet's there after all. And the thing I like about Tuffet is, the first thing is, when's the last time Tuffet was floating around in your head?
It's been a long, long time.
Yes, unless you have small children, chances are it's a very long time. And yet all I have to do is blah, 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 boom, Tuffet shows up. Once again, you wouldn't have to say anything, you could keep quiet, but to have it not come into your awareness, that's another thing. One reason I like Tuffet is, when I first started messing with this, I realized, well, I don't even know what a Tuffet is. I had to look it up. Turns out it's a low stool, so you'll be covered now if Tuffet ever comes up. The other thing is, I have a story, it's a pretty good story, maybe it's even a true story, about how Tuffet got into my head. When I was young, people read me nursery rhymes over and over again, and after a while I memorized them, and that's why I think of Tuffet. good story. I have no idea. I don't remember any of that stuff. Am I making sense to you?
Right.
So we may have stories about how things got inside of us. They may even be true stories, but there may be, we just don't know. Now, the kind of thing that we've been talking about so far is mainly due to our personal learning history. But people also have things show up because of their biological history. If I say boo to you in the right way, you'll get a bunch of sensations inside of your skin. It has very little to do with your learning history. It has much more to do with your biological history. If I do that to people all the way around the planet, I get pretty much the same reaction regardless of what kind of personal learning history they had. Okay? So, the first place to start then is being able to pick out or discriminate or tell the difference between thoughts and images and bodily sensations. And this is not exactly rocket science, but it is the place to start. So, I'm going to pick out 3 objects here, and then I'm going to ask you to copy and say just what I said. Okay?
Okay.
There's the table. There's the paper, there's the folder. Now, you do what I did.
There's the table, there's the paper, and there's the folder.
Perfect. Now, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and I'm going to ask you to pick out thoughts and images and sensations, however they show up, whatever order they show up. It's fine. All I'm asking you to do is to pick them out. Except, instead of using the words, there's the, I'm going to ask you to use the words, I'm having the. So it'll be, I'm having a thought, I'm having an image, I'm having a sensation. And then I'd like you to give me a little description of what experience you're having, because I don't know what's going on in there if you don't tell me.
Okay.
Now, there are a couple of tricks to this. The first trick is people often have the thought, I'm not having any thoughts. But of course, that's a thought. So that one would be, I'm having the thought, I'm not having any thoughts. The other thing is that sometimes the whole business really does just stop. And if that were to happen while you were practicing away from here, and I typically encourage people to practice when I'm not with them, or if they want to develop some skill on their own, just sit down. It doesn't take more than about 10 minutes a day. You get ready by brushing your teeth, you get ready by shaving, combing your hair, whatever you do to get ready for the day. Well, you're going to have plenty of thoughts and images and sensations all day long. You might as well get ready for them, and a good way is just to sit for about 10 minutes and notice them coming and going, and notice thoughts, images, sensations, and sometimes the whole thing just stops. And if that happened there, I would say fine, just sit and wait patiently, because eventually the thing will start up again. And in the meantime, you can practice being patient, and people often aren't that patient, especially with themselves. So you get something out of it. But here this evening, in order to move things along so we can demonstrate as much as possible, if you get stuck, just look around on the edge of your skin or inside your skin for sensations that are there but that you're just not noticing. So, for example, until I mention it, you probably weren't noticing the collar of your t-shirt against your skin on your neck. But as soon as I mention it, you do. Those sensations were there all along, you just weren't noticing them. So if you do get stuck, just look for some of those and report those. Okay?
Okay.
So this usually works better if people close their eyes, so let me invite you to do that.
Right.
And then just begin to report whatever shows up. I'm having the thought or image or sensation.
I'm having the sensation of the lights on my forehead.
Very good. And I'm guessing the sensation itself is warmth.
Warmth.
And possibly you had a thought, and the warmth is caused by the lights.
Correct. Yes, I had a thought that the warmth is caused by the lights.
Right. Very good. So continue.
I'm having more sensation I'm warm under my sweatshirt, and I'm also having thoughts that my sweatshirt is making me feel warm.
Very good. So there's the thoughts, my sweatshirt's making me feel warm, there's the bodily sensations of warmth underneath. Very good. What comes next?
I'm having sensations in my feet, that tightness in my legs.
Okay, very good. What
And
comes next?
the thought is that I'm a little bit tense in my legs, or tense.
Very good. What comes next?
Having flushing feeling on my face, warmth on my face.
Very good.
And,
Some more sensations.
more sensations.
And though you haven't spontaneously had one, just for the experience of doing it, make yourself have an image and report that.
Okay, I'm having an image of the interior of my living room.
Very good. So you can open your eyes. You can see this is not exactly rocket science. You're already pretty good at it. Most people are. And yet, if you do practice regularly, one of the things that you notice is there are skills that you begin to develop in noticing things. And typically, the thing you notice is that a couple of things happen close in time. When you began practicing, you got one but not the other. But after a while, you begin to pick up both of them.
Okay.
So, for example, when we first started, you were saying, I'm feeling warmth from the light. Well, you can't have a sensation of from the light. That's a thought.
Right.
But in the beginning, you get one. As you practice a little more, you begin to pick up, oh, I see, there's a couple of things going on here. Now, the point of being able to discriminate your thoughts and images and sensations from one another is then we can relate to them from different perspectives. Right now, you're sitting in a chair. If you were to get up and stand over here and look at it, you'd get one perspective of the chair. If you went to another side of the room, you could get a different perspective of the chair. Just because it's one chair, that doesn't mean you can't have more than one perspective on it. And the same thing with thoughts and images and bodily sensations. We can have more than one perspective on them. So what I want to talk about now is different perspectives that you can have on thoughts and images and sensations. Is there anything, though, that I haven't made clear up to now?
Oh, no.
Great. So the first perspective I call the umpire perspective. Most people in this culture, they know about umpires. Umpires make calls about the game, but they don't play in it. So, for example, if you go to a tennis match or you watch one on television, there's that big tall chair at center court, and someone's sitting up there making calls about the game. Clearly they're not playing in it. And the way this is done is to take a big concept like tennis shots and divide it into two smaller ones like inbounds and out of bounds, and then you make calls, inbounds and out of bounds. So we're going to do this with thoughts and images and bodily sensations. Now there are a zillion ways we could divide them up, but I'm going to suggest that for thoughts we use true and untrue. For images, we use attractive and unattractive. And for bodily sensations, we use pleasant and unpleasant.
Okay.
Now, it won't always work because some sensations are just kind of neutral. They're not particularly pleasant or unpleasant. And some images also are just kind of neutral. They're not particularly attractive or unattractive. And some thoughts simply won't lend themselves to the concepts of true or untrue. For example, you can have the thought, purple is lumpy and bumpy. Well, that doesn't work with true and untrue. I mean, you can think it, but it doesn't work with true and untrue. Am I making sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. So, I'm confident you do have the explanation. Let's try having a little experience.
Okay.
If you make yourself have this thought, I am sitting in a chair at the station. If you make yourself have that thought and then just listen for a call of true and untrue, my guess is you'll hear one. What'd you hear?
True.
Yeah. And if you make yourself have this thought, I am sitting in a rocket ship going around the moon. If you make yourself have that thought, and then again, just listen for a call in terms of true or untrue, again, you'll probably hear one.
And that would be false.
Yes. So you see how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing about the umpire perspective is you run into the same problem with the umpire perspective that you run into with actual umpires, which is to say sometimes you get bad calls. And most of the time, I'll just mention now, they have to do with thoughts. Every once in a while, I meet with somebody who came from a particularly sexually repressive environment, and they'll have a sexual sensation and the call will be unpleasant. Now, that's a bad call because sexual sensations are pleasant. They're not unpleasant. But as I say, most of the bad calls have to do with thoughts, and we could talk more about that later, but all I want to do now is to make clear how this perspective works.
Okay.
Now, there's a couple of other perspectives that we can also have. The first one of those I like to call the observer perspective. And from the observer perspective, you see that a thing is exactly what it is, and nothing more and nothing less. Now, that sounds very mysterious, but really it isn't. Whether a thought is true or untrue, it's still just a thought. Nothing more, nothing less. Whether an image is attractive or unattractive, it's still just an image. Again, nothing more, nothing less. Whether a sensation is pleasant or unpleasant, again, it's still just a sensation. Nothing more, nothing less. And this remains true no matter how much we refine the concept. So, for example, a true thought is nothing more and nothing less than a true thought. An unpleasant sensation is nothing more or nothing less than an unpleasant sensation. A very unpleasant sensation, nothing more, nothing less than a very unpleasant sensation. Am I making sense to you?
Yes.
So, again, we got the explanation. Let's try a little experience. If you make yourself have this thought, I am sitting in a chair, for you right now and for me, that thought would be true.
Right.
And yet, if you change your focus from blah, 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 I am sitting in a chair, if you change your focus to the experience of your back and hips and elbows being supported by the chair, I think you'll agree with me that that experience is nothing like blah, 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 blah.
Right. Yeah.
And this is important because if a person were to mix those two things up, they would be making a mistake. They're simply not the same. So even true thoughts, they're not the experience. Am I making sense to you?
Yes.
And it's important to be able to keep the distinction between one's experience and one's thoughts, whether they're true or not, separated because they're not the same thing. Okay? Now, the last perspective that I like to show people is what I call the perspective of actuality. And I don't want to be misunderstood. When you're having a thought or an image or a sensation, you actually are having it. That's not what I mean. Let me show you what I mean. This piece of paper here on the table, if you have the thought, there's a piece of paper on the table, is that thought the piece of paper?
No.
No, it's a thought. And if you were to close your eyes and make yourself have an image of the piece of paper on the table, would that image be the piece of paper?
Well, no.
No, it would be an image.
Right.
And when it comes to controlling bodily sensations, can you get a sense of what it would be like if you were touching the paper on each side and it was between your fingers?
Yeah.
And if you have that bodily sensation, or whether you can have it or not, if you did have it, would you actually be touching the paper or just having a bunch of sensations?
It would be just the sensations.
Yes, so there's a difference between our thoughts and images and bodily sensations and what we call the actual world, which is what we often have them about, but not always. Because a person can have the thought, there are 12 dragons behind the door, and there aren't any dragons just because we can think it doesn't make it so. Now, there's another aspect to this perspective of actuality. If you have the thought, there's a piece of paper on the table, are you that thought, or are you the person having the thought?
The person having the thought.
Yes, and if you had an image of the piece of paper on the table, would you be the image, or would you be the person having the image?
The person having the image.
And once again, if you could bring into your fingertips the sensations that would go with actually touching and rubbing the paper, would you be the sensations, or would you be the person having them?
I would be the person having them.
So, again, just as there's a difference between our thoughts and images and sensations in the actual world, there's a difference between us, the people who have thoughts and images and bodily sensations, and the thoughts and images and sensations we have. That making sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can I touch you a moment?
Sure.
There's a certain sense in which this is you. But there's another sense in which this isn't you. This is your body.
Okay.
And in some sense, there is a you that has a body, and that you that I'm talking about now has been around since you were 6 and 7 and 8 and had a completely different body. Am I making sense to you? So we might say that there's a sort of a psychological you, and there's a physical you, and there's kind of a mental you, thoughts and images and sensations, and then there's this other kind of psychological you that has thoughts and images and sensations. And one of the aspects of it is it's been around for a long time. In fact, my guess is you can't think of a time when this experience we're calling the psychological you wasn't around.
Right.
That making sense?
Right.
Yeah. Now, I want to describe something else, and I don't want to tell you your experience, but I want you to check it out and see if it's true for you. And that is, if you go to that experience we're calling the psychological you, it's a little bit like being in the eye of a center of a hurricane, in the sense that thoughts and images and sensations, they kind of spin around and spin around on the outside. But if you go to this place, there's more a sense of stability there. Yeah?
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah. And do you see it in the sense of you get it logically, or you can actually make some contact with that kind of experience?
More logically. I don't know if I can make contact with it right now.
Okay. So let me see if I can help you a little bit. If you focus on your hands, what the sensations are like there, and then if you notice that you're focusing, and I ask you, who's doing that? You'll hear in your something like I am or me, something like that. But those words aren't the thing that's doing it. They're making reference to this other thing that we've been talking about.
Right.
And if you go to that place, can you find a sense of stability there?
Yeah, I think I can.
Yeah. So, I like to point this out to people because people are often looking for things that are stable in life. And if you can find this space, it does tend to have that quality, and it's not exactly that difficult to find it. We've been doing it with pretty quickly, am I making sense to you? So now I'm going to ask you in a moment to do something that's going to seem kind of silly, but play along with me. There's a point to it.
Okay.
Okay. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to start saying out loud and over again, I cannot walk over to the door and back. I cannot walk over to the door and back. And while you're saying it, I'm going to give you an instruction. And I want you to follow the instruction, but I want you to keep saying, I cannot walk over to the door and back.
Okay.
So,
I cannot walk over to the door and back. I cannot walk over to the door and back.
great, keep it up.
I cannot walk over to the door and
And
back.
while you're saying it, walk over to that
Cannot
door in the
walk
studio
over to the
and
door
back.
and back. I cannot walk over to the door and back. I cannot walk over to the door and back. I cannot walk over to the door and back. I cannot walk over to the door and back.
Don't trip now.
I cannot walk over to the door and back. I cannot walk over to the door and back.
Okay, great. Now I want you to switch to, this is kind of a tongue twister, but I want you to switch to, I cannot stay seated, I must stand up.
I cannot stay seated, I must stand up. I cannot stay seated, I must stand up. I cannot stay seated, I must stand up.
Great, now you can stop.
Okay.
Now, you tell me if I'm right. It often seems or feels like When we have certain thoughts and certain images and certain bodily sensations, that we lose control of our hands and arms and feet and mouth in one of two ways. Either all of a sudden there are things that we formerly could do and now we can't, or things that we formerly could resist doing and now we can't. I know it does seem like that, but is it really true that we have to get the right thoughts and right images and right sensations inside of us and get rid of all the wrong ones to exert control over our hands and arms and feet and mouth? No.
No.
It's another one of life's illusions, of which there are many, and this one can be particularly strong. One of my favorites is the sunrise and sunset. We're living here in the Portland, Oregon area, and if you get up early enough and it's a clear day, which every once in a while we actually have one, and you look out toward Mount Hood and you wait a little while, sure enough, the sun up, 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 up. And then if you get in your car and drive over to the coast and sit over on one of those bluffs over there and the day stays clear, you wait a little while, sure enough, here it comes, down, 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 down into the ocean. In the newspaper, we're still writing sunrise and sunset. We're not writing earth turn. But we're all supposed to know the sun is not rising and setting, the earth is turning. This is another one of life's illusions. And this business of, in order to have control of my hands and arms and feet and mouth, I have to get rid of all the wrong thoughts and images and sensations and get all the right ones in here, is another illusion. Am I making sense to you? Any questions about anything I've shown you up till now?
No.
Okay. So, there are some additional things I'd like to show you, but something I'd like to show you now is a little activity that can be helpful to get centered and focused and be present in the moment that you're in. And I waited until I showed you thoughts and images and sensations so you'd have a little sense of those distinctions. So it often helps to focus if you close your eyes, so let me invite you to do that. And with your eyes closed, there's always a variety of sensations available. Some of them we experience as coming from outside of our skin. In this studio, I can hear a little hum. I don't know if you can hear it. That's an example of a sensation experienced from outside of our skin. And the sensations I'm interested in are the ones that you have on the edge of your skin or inside your skin. And any and all of them are equally good as something that one can focus on. So I'm going to just suggest that we start with your folded hands. You can feel the shape of your fingers. There's the texture of your skin. Your hands are sitting on some clothing, so there's the texture of the clothing. There may be places where you have more or less pressure, and there may be places that feel cooler or warmer. All of those sensations are there, and they're available to make contact with. So, I'm going to ask you to do exactly that. To notice that variety of sensations there in your hands, simply as the sensations they are, experienced in this moment and experienced in this place. Your breath is something that's always with you. It comes and goes, arrives and departs. And with it come another variety of sensations with that cycle of your breath coming and going. So I'd like to invite you, just as we did before, to notice that variety of sensations, to notice them simply as the sensations they are, experienced here in this place and now at this moment. Like your breath, which comes and goes, so too your thoughts and images come and go, arrive and depart. And so often they invite you to go traveling with them, to leave this moment for some other moment, and to leave this place for some other place. It's a little like sitting at a taxi cab stand and watching cabs arrive. The door opens and there's a thought or an image inside, inviting you to go traveling with it. And yet you can remain seated, simply noticing the thought or image as the thought or image it is. Noticing a memory or a projection into the future, simply as the memory or the projection into the future it is. And after a while, the door will close, the cab will leave, another arrives, the door opens, another thought, another image, another memory, another projection into the future, inviting you to go travel. And as before, you can notice that thought or image or memory or projection into the future simply as it is, noticing, observing, and in a while it too passes on. And so it is, coming and going, arriving and departing. And when you have that sense of being here in this moment, now, at this time, open your eyes and we'll continue. Now, as I said, that's a little activity that people can use to get focused in the moment they're in. And I'm going to ask you, I don't know for sure, but during the time that I was speaking, did you find yourself becoming more relaxed?
Yeah, it was very relaxing.
And I asked that question because most people do find themselves becoming more relaxed. And one of the things you'll notice is I never said anything about becoming more relaxed. The only thing I talked about was being present with what's actually here. Well, there are no lions or tigers or bears. We're not in the middle of a freeway. There's no speeding cars. There's nothing dangerous here. So, of course, when a person gets in contact with a place that there isn't any danger, they do relax. I take this to be an indication of how often we're traveling off someplace else. We're not really in the moment that we're in. And if there was something dangerous here, all the more reason to be here, psychologically speaking, and not somewhere else. That making sense to you?
Yes. Yeah.
So, I'm not against psychological traveling. It can be a fun, interesting thing to do and can have its own usefulness. On the other hand, when you're traveling and you don't realize it, you can engage in this activity, maybe bring yourself back into this moment so you can better focus on doing the things that you want to make important in your life. Is that making sense to you?
Yeah.
Now, this piece of paper, which I'll let you just have a look at here, right up here it talks about choices available in difficult situations. And you'll notice that there are 3 Roman numerals, Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3, and each of them has an A part and a B part. And the A parts are put up with things the way they are, work for change, and leave the scene. And the B parts are simply whatever was at A, plus get disturbed and or loaded. Now, by disturbed, I mean angry, anxious, guilty, whatever. And by loaded, I mean alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, pick your favorite taffy. That makes sense to you?
Yes.
So the first point to be made is there's nothing that a person can do, disturbed and or loaded, that they couldn't do not disturbed and not loaded, and they probably would do it better. Am I making sense to you? Now, I'm not bringing this up because I'm trying to tell you or anybody watching Well, if you're disturbed, just knock it off. What I am saying is that if it's leaving you, if it's passing out of your body, let it go. There's no point in hanging on to it. It wasn't doing you that much good to start with. So, for example, a lot of people will say to me, well, Doc, you just don't understand. I work better under pressure. To which I usually say, well, I bet you if you start earlier, you find out you work just fine. You don't really have to get under pressure.
Right.
When I was in college, I never found out how much better the fourth draft of a paper could be than the first draft. I didn't find out until I got to graduate school, and the reason was I never started any papers until the night before they were due when I was in college. There surely wasn't going to be any fourth draft. It wasn't that I worked better under pressure, it's just that I didn't get to work until I was under pressure. Am I making sense to you?
Yeah.
And my first job when I got out of graduate school was working in a college counseling center. That was part of it. And about 6, 8 weeks into the term, people would start showing up at the center and they would say, Doc, I'm very worried about my paper. And I would say, well, have you tried writing it? Oh, no, but I'm very worried about it. Well, worry is one of these things that feels like you're doing something about a problem when you aren't. Work on the paper. That making sense to you? Another thing, people will tell me, well, Doc, I can't speak up until I get worked up. Well, usually I say, let's open your mouth, see if we can get air to go across your vocal cords and get words to come out. Probably you can do it. You don't really have to get worked up before you speak up. Am I making sense to you?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, again, I'm not saying don't worry, don't get anxious, don't get angry. I'm not saying any of that. I am saying if it's leaving, let it go. It wasn't doing you that much good to begin with. Am I making sense to you? Okay. Now, there are a couple of formulas on this paper that I want to describe because they, too, are important to the landscape of addressing psychological issues. I'm going to take another little drink. The first one I call the formula for human liberation. Now, as far as I can tell, we were supposed to get this in high school, but most of us missed it. I know for sure I did. Because in high school, they give you homework that you don't want to do. In fact, I would say really the whole point of high school is to get homework that you don't want to do. But then, in the service of actually learning something, or simply making better grades, and anybody who's been around school for a while knows those two things are not the same thing, you make yourself do the unpleasant homework, and you refrain from doing things that would be a lot more pleasant, the list of which is usually quite long. And it's not just to annoy yourself. It's in the service of something you make more important. Now, if you hold on to that principle, then you never have to be a slave to circumstance. It doesn't matter if the circumstance is inside your skin or outside your skin. If you'll make yourself do something unpleasant and refrain from doing something pleasant in the service of something you make more important, then you never have to be a slave to circumstance. Am I making sense to you?
Yeah.
That's why I call this the formula for human liberation. Now, something else needs to be said about this in the service of something I make more important. If I gave you a compass, the thing would point to magnetic north. And if you started off in that direction and I kept you sufficiently supplied, eventually you'd get to that point on the planet we call magnetic north, and the compass needle would spin around, and every time you walked away from there, it'd point you right back where you came from. Am I making sense to you?
Yeah.
But if you took that same compass and went either east or west, then you'd be like the Energizer Bunny commercial here in the United States. You just keep going and going and going. Am I making sense to you?
Right.
You'd never come to a place like magnetic north. Now, that is the kind of thing that I like to use the phrase leading principles to describe. Some people like the term values. I like the term leading principles because if you will follow them, they will literally lead you. Am I making sense to you? And they're not like goals. A goal is something that you can accomplish. If you want to graduate high school, if you just sit and study, probably you can get it done if you turn in the homework and show up for class. Okay, so you graduate high school. If you want to be the best educated person you can be, when would you accomplish that?
Right.
Never. You keep going and going and going. If you want to have, you want to get married, well, probably there's somebody. And you accomplish it. But if you want to be the best mate you can be, when would you finish with that?
Never.
Yeah, as long as you've got a mate, you can still be the best mate you can be. And the thing is, if you've been being a lousy mate time after time after time, you could then change immediately and become the best mate you can be. You can change what principle you're following. Similarly with children. You can make children the usual way. Maybe you can adopt one. You achieve the goal. Now I'm a parent. But if you want to be the best parent you can be, when do you finish with that?
Never.
Yeah. What they need at 2 is not what they need at 32. And yet you can continue on and on and on following that leading principle. Am I making sense to you? Now, when I talk to people about this, they often say, oh, I see, Doc, you're talking about getting on a path. And that's not quite right. When you look backwards in your life, there is a path because you made it. But when you look forward in your life, there isn't a path. No one has ever lived your life before. You're the only one who can do it. And yet, in this kind of wilderness of the moment, we can have leading principles that give us direction. Am I making sense to you?
Yeah.
So, there's something now I'd like to show you in a physical, experiential way. So let me have you stand up.
Okay.
And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to walk toward that wall. And I'd like to get your agreement before we do this, that if you were going to touch the wall, you can't do it from here. The contingencies of life are such that you have to get closer to it. Agreed?
Yes.
Now, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the way that you go. Because there are at least 2 different banners, you might say, that you could travel under. The first banner is, I have to, I have to, I have to. And just to make it a little more dramatic, as you walk over close to the wall there, and if you can touch it, fine, go under that banner, saying out loud, I have to, I have to, I have to.
Okay. I have to, I have to, I have to, I have to.
Okay, so come on back. That's fine. Now, I'm going to ask you to go again. The camera may not be able to track you all the way, but that's okay. I want you to go this time under a different banner.
Okay.
And that banner is, I choose to, I choose to, I choose to.
Okay. I choose to, I choose to, I choose to.
Okay, come on back. Have a seat. Now, you made the same trip both times. And the contingencies of life didn't change. In order to touch the wall, you had to go over there. Which way would you prefer to travel?
I choose to.
Yeah,
Right.
because I choose to is about this human liberation. I have to, I have to, I have to. That's life as a slave. And by the way, if you live life as a slave, you can be pretty sure that you're going to have some slave revolts along the way. And I'll bet you in your life, when you think back to, I have to, I have to, I have to, you've had some slave revolts. Oh yeah, watch this.
Right.
Am I making sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one more thing, experientially, I want you to do, is to get up and move over that way again a little bit.
Okay.
And a little bit more. That's fine.
Right here?
There.
Okay.
Now, I want you to move very slowly, take very small steps and move very slowly in this direction because I want you to notice something as you're moving. Okay, so move. Now, what I want you to notice is there any point as you're moving now that you couldn't immediately turn to the right, immediately turn to the left, or continue as you are?
I could turn to the right. I could turn to the left.
Yeah. Now, what you're in contact with right now is what human freedom is like when you're in contact with it. You can immediately change direction. Am I making sense to you?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so have a seat.
All right.
The trouble is, most of the time, we're not in contact with this experience of we can immediately change. So, if we're following a principle that is not the principle we're really interested in following, we're not being the best mate we can be when that's the one we would choose, we can immediately change to what's the direction right now of being the best mate I can be, the best parent I can be, the best worker I can be. Am I making sense to you? So, any questions about any of this business about the formula for human liberation?
No, it seems to be pretty clear in making the choice to correct the path, or not the path, but the direction in which you choose to go is very liberating.
Yeah. So what I want to do now is the last formula, the one for serenity in action. And a lot of people are familiar with this prayer by, usually credited to Reinhold Niebuhr, that starts with, let me accept the things I cannot change. You may have heard it. Yeah, a lot of people have. Well, let me give you an example of why I have a slightly different way of wording it. In my office, there's a door that's on one wall, and though we're not there now, I think everyone would agree if I pay the people who own the building enough money, I can get the door changed from the wall it's on and get it changed to a different wall. But would I ever be able to get it changed if I refuse to accept that it's on the wall it's on? If I keep insisting, nope's not there, nope's not there, will I ever get it changed?
Probably not.
No. So you can see when it comes to the formula for serenity in action, I start with, let me accept the world as I find it. Never mind if I can change it or not. That's not what's important. What's important is it's here. And things that were here, well, they were here. And things that might be here, well, they might be here. We better accept all of this. Now, in English, the word accept comes across a little passively. So I like to suggest this phrase, I give my permission. Now, you may not give your approval. There's a lot of things in life we may not approve of. But if we don't give our permission for the world to be as it is, or was, or may be, who's going to end up suffering?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, us. So this is really a self-helping move to accept the world, to give our permission for the world to be as it is, was, or may be. Then, wisdom to see what would be good to change, because it's not good to change everything. Willingness to act and willingness to follow through, because getting the ball rolling is not the same thing as keeping it rolling. And then finally, gratitude for the opportunity to live my life as best I can. Now, a couple of things here need explanation. The first one is willingness, because there's really two kinds. The first one, if you think about people who are flight phobic, you can see both kinds. The first one is what you might call willingness with your feet. People who are flight phobic, they typically won't get on the airplane. The other one is willingness with your heart, because people who do get on the airplane, they're often white-knuckle flyers the whole time they're on. Now, both of these are metaphors, but willingness with your feet is not too metaphorical. You can see people moving their hands and arms and feet and mouth. Willingness with your heart is more metaphorical, because I'm not talking about that big muscle in the middle of your chest.
Right.
So, a couple of ways to get a hold of this metaphor is make a fist.
Okay.
Now, what does it take to have an open hand? You just stop holding it closed, right? Now, to get that, it requires more.
Right.
But if you just stop holding your hand closed, it opens all by itself. Similarly, your heart. You don't have to open it. Just stop holding it closed. It'll open by itself. Another way you can get a hold of this is to cup your hands. Now, if I had a feather and I put it in your hands, you could hold it gently, and it would be gentle. And if I had the fruit of a prickly pear cactus and put that in your hands, it wouldn't be gentle, and yet you could hold it gently. Willingness with your heart means holding the thoughts and images and sensations you have gently. Am I making sense to you?
Yes.
Now, going into different places in life is a lot like going into a movie. There's a price of admission. If you don't pay, you can't go in. And there's two parts to it. There's what you do with your hands and arms and feet and mouth. If you don't do it, you can't go in. And there's the way you do it, willingly or unwillingly. You don't get to the head of the movie line and say to the person back there, "Here's your money, you no good so-and-so," and throw it through there, do you?
No.
No, you pay willingly. And so it is that there are things in terms of thoughts and images and sensations that show up when you do things with your hands and arms and feet and mouth to enter places in life. And you can hold them gently. Be willing to hold them. Making sense to you? Now, the last part, gratitude for the opportunity to live my life as best I can. The Buddhists say all life is sorrowful. That's roughly the first noble truth, and the second noble truth tells you why, because we don't always get what we want. Well, the Rolling Stones said we don't always get what we want, and if the Buddhists and the Rolling Stones can agree on something, I'd call that pretty good cross-validation. They're not agreeing on sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Right.
Making sense to you?
Yeah.
So, we don't always get what we want. Now, the thing about us humans is we can imagine possible futures and then organize our behavior to bring them into existence. That's how this studio got built. And we can set standards, and we can try to get our behavior to meet the standards. The cows and the pigs and the dogs and the cats, they ain't doing that. Whatever is different about us than them, that's different. And what this means is we have more sorrow than any other beings on the planet because our plans don't always work out. And we don't always meet the standards we set. And yet I suggest this is something we can be grateful for. We're the only ones who can do it. So, we have the opportunity to live our lives as best we can, to choose the direction we go, to be where we are, and to do what's important. So, okay, I'm Dr. Hank Robb. I'm back with my friend Bill. We're here talking about the general psychological context within which a whole lot of different life issues can be addressed. And what we didn't get a chance to talk about was the issue of bad calls if you're using the umpire perspective. Because just like umpires in the actual world, if you use the umpire perspective, you sometimes will get bad calls. And as we noted, usually they're about thoughts. Very rarely do people get a call of unpleasant for sensations that are actually pleasant, or vice versa. Very rarely do you get a call of unattractive for images that are attractive, or vice versa. But when it comes to thoughts, a little more problem. So there's about 5 that I want to go over. In fact, there's exactly 5. And I want to start with the first one, which is awfulizing. Now, it's certainly true in life that there are things that we like and things that we don't like. The things that we like, we usually call good, and the things that we don't like, we usually call bad. Now, my wife puts pickles in tuna fish, and she declares that this is good, and I declare that it's bad. I don't like pickles in my tuna fish. And there are certainly degrees of bad. There's bad and worse and worse and worse and worse, and finally you get out to the end of that chain, and we need a name for the end of that, and we're going to call it awful. Awful is as bad as it gets. Now, there aren't any degrees of awful. We're not going to have awful and more awful, because if you start that, you just have to have another word for the end of that chain. Okay. So we need kind of, well, what are we going to understand is out there at awful, bad, pretty bad. And I usually start with imagining that one is in a vehicle wreck, some kind of automobile wreck, and due to the wreck, they end up paralyzed from the neck down and in constant pain, and I usually say for 20 years. Now, 20 years is arbitrary. We could have picked 15, we could have picked 25, but just for the sake of beginning somewhere, let's pick 20.
Okay.
Now, the first thing is that a Martian story, or could it really happen?
No, it could very really happen, yeah.
Yes, and it seems pretty bad until I throw in that some of your loved ones are also in this vehicle, and they're burned and maimed in this wreck. So they go on living for years afterwards suffering, and since you are conscious, you know about their suffering. Now, does that make it worse, or is that just unimportant?
It seems like that would make it worse.
Yeah, anybody who thinks their own personal suffering is the be-all and end-all, they're just not hooked up to anybody else. You get hooked up to other people. When they suffer, you suffer too. Mm-hmm. In fact, if you get hooked up to a cause and the cause suffers, you'll suffer too. Am I making sense to you? So, if we take all of this bad stuff for 20 years and say we're going to call that 100% bad, then the rest of it's just arithmetic. 50% bad, well, that's going to be 10 years, and 10% bad, that's going to be 2 years, and 5% bad would be 365 days in a row, paralyzed from the neck down and in constant pain, with people you care about burned and maimed, and then poof, it would be over with. Now, when was the last time you actually had anything that really was as bad as that? 5%.
I would say never.
Me either. And with any luck, we're both going to slide by.
Right.
And nothing really bad is ever going to happen.
All right.
Now, you notice I didn't ask, well, when was the last time it felt or seemed like something was 5% bad? Because that could have been the traffic on the way over here, or on the way back from work, or the kid when they threw up, or, you know, all kinds of stuff.
Right.
Because the world feels and seems all sorts of ways, but in English we have this phrase, put things in perspective. And if you put things in perspective, they never seem the way they seemed before, which is kind of the whole point of putting things in perspective. Our usual problem is that our perspective is, well, what is this compared to how it was 5 minutes ago, or is it happening to the person across the street? And that's not exactly a big perspective. So that's the first one, that sometimes people have the thought, this is awful, their umpire says true, it's a bad call. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Now, the one that usually comes right along with it is what I call frustration intolerance. Or I can't stand it-itis, because not only is it awful, but I can't stand it. Now, this is really nuts, because if it were true that you couldn't stand it, it would have killed you and you wouldn't be standing it anymore. Am I making sense to you?
Yes, yeah.
If I left this studio and stood out there in the street and let a truck hit me at 50 miles an hour, I really wouldn't stand it. It would kill me. But if it didn't kill me right away, then I would stand whatever pain came along with it until I did die, or they got so much morphine in me I didn't know what was going on anymore. The plain fact is, I don't like it doesn't equal I can't stand it.
Right.
It only equals I don't like it. We stand anything until we can escape it or change it, and things we can escape or change, we are stuck standing until we do escape or change them. Am I making sense to you? So the real question is, are we going to stand it well, or are we going to stand it poorly? Now, how well do you imagine that you do when you really take seriously, I can't stand it? Well or poorly?
Well, poorly.
Yeah. So, it's not true, and it doesn't help. Now, that's only 2 strikes, but in this case, we'll call that good enough. And so if the umpire were to say true to I can't stand it, it's a bad call.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Now, the next one is what I call demandingness. The world must go my way. And there's really 2 versions of it, the 2-year-old version and the 13 or 14-year-old version. Now, the 2-year-old version goes like this. the world must go my way because I say so. You know how 2-year-olds are. In fact, you have a child not a whole lot past 2, so you probably can remember how they are.
Definitely.
Now, if you have that one, I often say, well, go get yourself a crown, and you can put it on, and we'll all realize that you are running the universe, and we can start doing it your way. Now, usually, when I put my crown on, I get a little laugh or a smile or a giggle, but even people who are very serious and dour and they never crack a smile, if they go out and get themselves a crown and put it on, it only takes about 5 seconds to recognize, well, I guess I'm a little over the top. I'm not exactly running the universe. Am I making sense to you?
Right, yeah.
Now, the more common one is the 13 or 14-year-old version, because when people get to be about that age, they realize that other human beings are often persuaded by reason. But being human beings themselves, they take this useful insight too far, and they think, well, if I have reasons, the world has to change. So the usual refrain of a 13 or 14-year-old is, well, that's not fair, well, that's not fair, well, that's not fair. As if by pointing out unfairness, the world would magically change, which, of course, it doesn't. And why? Well, the world is running on something, but it certainly is not human reason. All one has to do to remind themselves of this is to think about how most of us got here. Most of us, it was vaginal delivery. There's a few people show up by cesarean section, but mostly it's vaginal delivery. Now, I'll give you, that is a system that does work, but it's hardly reasonable. No engineer worked that out. Am I making sense to you?
Yes, yeah.
Every once in a while I get some guy who thinks that it's reasonable, but it's a long distance between women who think this is a reasonable system. Am I making sense to you? Now, the reason this is important is it doesn't matter if you got 5 or 15 or 50 very good reasons. The world still doesn't have to go that way, and if you have that thought and your umpire says true, it's a bad call. Any questions about that one?
No, not at all.
Okay. Now, the next one I call person rating, and you can get a little handle on that one by a nursery rhyme that goes, Little Jack Horner sat in a corner. And if I have a woman with me, then I usually say, well, let's change it to Jackie. But in your case, we can use the original version. Little Jack Horner sat in a corner, eating his Christmas pie. He put in his thumb and pulled out a plum and said, what a good boy am I. Now, if little Jack sticks with that logic, put in my thumb, pull out a plum, what a good boy am I, what's he going to have to say when he sticks his thumb into life's pie and pulls out a rotten tomato? What a bad, rotten boy am I? And then he's going to end up on what I would call the self-esteem yo-yo. First you're up, then you're down, then you're up, then you're down, up, down, up, down, up, down, depending on what you've done lately. This is why, unlike so many of my psychological or mental health colleagues, I don't want people who are going to benefit from this perspective to try to have high self-esteem. It's just a trap. As soon as you're up, you'll screw up, because that's the way humans are. They make mistakes, and then you'll be down in the toilet again. So what I suggest instead is self-acceptance. I rate what I do, not who I am. I put in my thumb, I pull out a plum. Hey, this is great, I got a plum. I put in my thumb, I pull out a rotten tomato. Ooh, rotten tomatoes, I don't like them.
Right.
I rate my traits, that is how I usually act, and I rate my behavior, because I don't act the same all the time. I can rate both of those, but I don't rate my personhood. Each of us was born a member of the human family. We're going to die a member of the human family. We can have lots of different kinds of worth, good or bad parenting worth, good or bad citizen worth, good or bad worker worth. But when it comes to human worth, it's the same always. We start a human being, we end a human being. We could be lousy members of our society, but we'd still be members of the human family. That making sense to you?
Yeah.
And yet when our umpire says, when we have the thought, I did a lousy thing, what a louse I am, and our umpire says true, it's a bad call.
Right.
Now, there's also another way that you can have a little experience of this one, and I would like to point it out. Remember when we were talking about that kind of psychological you aspect, the sense of, in a certain way, I'm not my body, I'm the person who has a body? And that psychological you has been around since before you had this body. When you were 6 and 7 and 8, had a different body. And there's also a sense that many people can make of a kind of stability there. Thoughts, images, and sensations, they kind of whirl around and come and go a little bit like the outside of a hurricane. But this sense of the psychological you has more of a stable quality to it. Now, if you put yourself at that experience, you may find that there's a sense of aliveness or beingness or isness there, and yet not really any sense of goodness or badness. So I invite you, try putting yourself there. I don't want to tell you what your experience is, but check it out. See if you can have that experience of aliveness or isness or beingness. It really has nothing to do with goodness or badness.
Okay.
Yeah? Is that something you can make contact with?
I think so. Should we try it right now?
Yeah.
Okay. I just close my eyes and try?
You can close your eyes, but a good way is to just focus on something. You can focus on your hands. Notice that you're focusing. And if I ask you who's doing that, you'll probably have a thought like, I am or me. And yet the thing that's doing it is not a sound. It's something else. That something else, the one who notices and notices that they're noticing. If you're at that place, can you get that sense of aliveness or beingness? Yeah. Usually not that hard to find. Now, the last one is entitlement. In English, if I say to you, well, if you go out and do X, then I promise I'll do Y, whatever X is and whatever Y is. And then if you go out and you do X, you come back and say to me, okay, I did X, now I'm entitled to get Y. That's the way the language works. The thing is, don't people sometimes back out?
Right, yeah.
Yes, they do. And does the universe come rushing in and say, oh, no, backing out in this universe?
No, not at all.
No. Maybe you can get into court. Maybe. Maybe you can get a judgment while you're in court, and maybe you can get it enforced, because there are people who have judgments, but they can't get them enforced. The universe is certainly not underwriting our contracts.
Right.
And that's assuming you got a contract, which you can have with other human beings, but you know anybody who's got a contract with God or the universe?
Nope.
Not me either, as I'm fond of pointing out. Last person I heard of got a note from God was Moses. Even Muhammad had to take dictation. He didn't get a note. That making sense to you?
Right, yeah.
So if you're thinking, well, I deserve, I'm entitled, and your umpire says true, once again, it's a bad call. Yes, you may be entitled in a social sense, but not in some cosmic sense.
Right.
The other thing that's worth noting about entitlement is if you really go around with, I'm entitled, I'm entitled, I'm entitled, I'm entitled, I deserve, I deserve, I deserve, I deserve, and you get it, you're not that grateful, because after all, I'm entitled.
Right.
And if you don't get it, you're usually very angry, because after all, I deserve. So entitlement is a little philosophy that if you take it seriously, you end up with ingratitude and hostility. This is not a great way to live.
Right.
That making sense to you?
Yes.
So, any questions about anything that I've shown you in this latest round, or anything from the previous times that we met, or any comments that you might have? Then I want to show you a couple of other little tricks.
A question about the 5 disturbing thoughts. Is that what they are? The awfulizing
Yeah, I usually try to refer to them as, if you're using the umpire perspective, here's some places you're likely to get bad calls. Here's five thoughts that if you always rely on your umpire, you very likely will get bad calls about those five. And
basically the flip side to that, the good calls are then coming from just accepting the non-judgmental.
Let's see. I don't like pickles in my tuna fish. Well, if I hear true to that, that's a good call. I don't like pickles in my tuna fish. Right. But the good news about the observer and the perspectives of actuality is you never run into this problem of good calls and bad calls if you stick with those two perspectives. Because from the observer perspective, whether a thought is true or untrue, it's still just a thought. And thoughts and images and sensations, well, they're not the actual world, and they're not us either. Now, there are dangers in the world, but our thoughts about dangers, they're not the dangers. So by keeping clear that thoughts and images and sensations are only thoughts and images and sensations, nothing more and nothing less, they're not us, they're not the actual world, then those perspectives can be very useful, and you don't run into the problem that you have with the umpire perspective. But if you want to use the umpire perspective, then I would say you better particularly be on the lookout for these five, because they often cause people trouble.
So it invites more suffering, it seems like, more psychological suffering.
It sure can, because a lot of people get very tangled up in, is this a true thought, is it a not true thought, and then it's a true thought and they buy into it, and it turns out to be one of these troublemakers. It's awful, I can't stand it, and then they're kind of off to the races. I'm entitled to something different than I'm getting, and I have to have it. I've got my 50 reasons, and again, off to the races. Doesn't work like that. And especially self-esteem. If I do good, I am good. If I do dirt, I am dirt. And then they're always up and down, trying to prove their worth.
So then, by that philosophy, having no self-esteem is better than having self-esteem?
Self-acceptance, rather than self-esteem, turns out to be much more helpful. Now, it's great to have pride in your performance. I'm not against that. But when you start getting the notion my performance is me, and then if I do badly, I am bad, and of course even more annoying, if I do great, then I am somebody, and who am I? And you spend a little time with that, it's not very pleasant, especially to be around it. Never mind if you're the one who's doing it. I'm making sense to you.
Yes.
Yeah. So, thank you very much for joining me and making it possible to bring this information to everybody who gets a chance to view it. Thanks very much.
Thank you for the opportunity for being here.
So, we have the opportunity to live our lives as best we can, to choose the direction we go, to be where we are, and to do what's important.